Hi, Gary Stearman once again. With me, L.A. Marzulli, and we're going to continue discussing the contents of his book, On the Trail of the Nephilim, Part 2. And when we were talking last time, L.A., we were talking about, how can I say, the justification for believing that this world has been invaded by, and I don't want to call them aliens, that's a loaded word, but there have been non-human beings on this planet for a long time, going all the way back before the flood, going back to the days of the patriarchs, going back to the days of Moses. The Bible talks about them, but people seem a little hesitant to discuss that possibility, okay? That's where we sort of left things last time. You've done some adventuring, and in The Trail of the Nephilim 2, there's an adventure that I actually got to be a little part of, because a while back, you and I were both at the Nephilim Mounds 2 conference in Newark, Ohio, and you introduced an artifact, which, by the way, you feature here in On the Trail of the Nephilim 2, and you call it the Nephilim Lance with a question mark. And tell us about this thing.
It was interesting. We were at the Nephilim Mounds 2 conference, and I was with Chief Joseph Riverwind, who's a Tano Native American tribe. It's called the Tano Indians, and they're out of Puerto Rico. And we had been at another site, the two of us looking at this other site in another state. And Chief Joseph came to the conference. And this man by the name of Bob Shelley came up to me at a break and said, Elliot, I have an artifact, and I'd love to have you look at it. I said, well, Bob, bring it in, and we'll look at it at the next break. And so that's what he did. And so it's Bob Shelley, the owner of the artifact, and Chief Joseph and myself, and we're standing around, and Bob Shelley unwraps this what appears to me to be a sword blade, very old-looking sword blade, and I go, we pray over it first, and I pick it up, and I see it's very heavy, and there's no way I can wield this as a sword. And as we're talking, Chief Joseph gets very excited and goes, guys, you're looking at this through your cultural eyes. It's not a sword, it's a lance. And we're going, what? A lance? And he goes, yes. The oral tradition, get this, because this is just amazing to me. The oral tradition of certain Native American tribes talk about these tall, red-haired giants, many of whom had 6 fingers, okay? And they would war against Native American tribes. And their lances were so long and so heavy that this lance was about that long, about 31 inches long, almost 3 feet. And they would come in with these large lances, and they would skewer 3 braves. They would run it through 3 braves. And there's one shot where it's Bob Shelley, myself, and Chief Joseph all standing, back to back kind of thing, and holding the lance, and the lance easily fits through the 3 of us. And of course, when we begin to think about this, and we go back to Ishbi Benob and the biblical accounts, whose spear, the staff was like a weaver's being, and the spearhead weighed 300 shekels. When you convert that, you get 7.5 pounds. Guess how much the Nephilim Lance weighs? It weighs 7.5 pounds, which is that a coincidence? So we have had it tested at a metallurgy lab, and it's basically, the copper is extremely pure. We are in the process of going to weapons experts, trying to date it through their expertise, trying to find out what this thing is. It's very old looking. You can see the hammer marks clear as a bell on this thing. It has been worked and tooled, and Native Americans did not work metallurgy like this. They just didn't. And so Chief Joseph saw it, and to him, it was a confirmation of the old oral tradition of these tall, red-haired giants, many of whom had 6 fingers.
Now that tallies with your discoveries in Peru, the red hair being the tip-off.
Sure.
What is it about red-haired giants? But the thing is, there's a picture developing now. It's a global picture.
Yes, it is.
Of non-human beings who have populated the earth at various times. They're mentioned in the Bible. They're called, and I always have fun with the names, the Zamzumim and the Zuzim and the Iyim and the Nephilim and the Rephaim, all those names and as you have put it, suggesting they might have been different genetic bloodlines, and may have actually looked different, but they were all giant. Now, this actually happened. It's a true story, and the confirmation by Chief Joseph of that in their oral tradition.
Yes.
This would have been a giant, the weapon of a giant. Of course, my mind immediately goes to Goliath. You know, we have the Bible story of Goliath, and usually he is sort of depicted as a sport. You know, there aren't that many giants, maybe just one or two or three. Actually, he had some brothers.
Sure he did. Yeah.
But the idea that there are races of these super beings, if you will, it just doesn't wash with most people. So that's the trail of the Nephilim you're on.
Absolutely. And you know, look, when both On the Trail 1 and 2 and Watcher 6, all of these begin to, like you talk about, paint a picture. We're uncovering more artifacts. And these are, I mean, you know, the skeptics can look at this, and this isn't from a story. This is a real artifact which we have in our possession, which we've looked at, which we've handled, and we've tested some of it, and we're ongoing testing, just like the skulls, where we've got samples that are in Peru. We're in league with 3 archaeologists, two in America, 1 in Spain, and that's 4. 1 in Peru. 4 archaeologists attempting to get the DNA samples so we can do DNA testing. The preliminary DNA testing has shown that the mitochondrial DNA doesn't match anything in the genome. So you look at the lances, you look at some of the photographic evidence, which we'll talk about, the idea of these elongated skulls, what we talked about last time, the 1842 artist sketch of that fetus with the elongated head taken from a mummy who was about 7 months pregnant. What is it doing with an elongated head in the womb? So everything that we point to, the what we call fallen angel or Nephilim architecture, it seems to be validating the biblical narrative. And that's the whole point of why I'm on the trail.
Yeah.
Because it validates the biblical narrative. It points back to the biblical narrative as being true. And if that part of it's true, then when we jump into Matthew 24 and we read the days of Noah, all of a sudden that statement is just loaded, just pregnant with meaning. And it's astounding. And we can equate what happened in antiquity with what's about to happen or what is happening in modernity.
On page 56 of On the Trail of the Nephilim 2, L.A. has a picture of a man with a shovel in his hand. He's digging around what appears to be a giant skeleton. And before we go to that, there are hundreds. You and I have both heard of hundreds of stories about giant skeletons having been found, but they mysteriously disappear.
Always.
What's going on?
There seems to be a deliberate cover-up, and it points back to, unfortunately, the Smithsonian Institute. I say that with all due respect, but it seems account after account after account, we read, and the Smithsonian sent out a team of men who took the bones and packed them up and promised to get back to them. Well, the promise is broken because they never do get back to them, and the bones just simply vanish. And we actually requested to look at the bones in the Smithsonian. We got a very condescending letter back to us. And mainstream archaeology insists that there was no such thing as giants. This has been disproven long ago. No, it hasn't. It's just that it's been deliberately obfuscated long ago. And I won't get into that so much, but it was deliberately done so and is being done so now. The university system, everything is controlled. All the information is controlled. If you don't believe me, watch Ben Stein's movie Expelled, because he talks about this, no intelligence allowed. Any other thinking, any other thought process, any other paradigm embraced other than the Darwinian paradigm is immediately dealt with. And you can lose your tenure, you can lose your job, your reputation, everything, if you even point to something like intelligent design. Well, all this points back to the biblical narrative, which of course is a lot more than intelligent design. It's the God of the Bible creating ex nihilo from nothing, speaking it into existence through Yeshua, through Jesus, and here we are. And that's what it proves, in my opinion.
And there is a dark side, and the dark side has produced a number of stories that have been, let's put it this way, buried. and buried by people who don't want the dark side stories to come out. They want to operate incognito, in my opinion, and they're very successful at doing it.
Sure.
Now, back to on the trail of the Nephilim 2, you flew across to Catalina Island.
Literally.
Literally.
I got to fly the plane.
Pictures of you got to fly the
Yeah.
plane. That's marvelous. And you took actually many pictures over there, but you also were able to secure a picture, which is right here on page 56. We'll try to get this on the screen so you can take a look at it. It shows a man with a shovel digging up a giant skeleton. Tell us about that.
Well, the backstory of this is Jim Watson has written a book called Mysterious Catalina, and in that is a chapter on Ralph Glidden. And so Jim and I met for dinner one night, and we discussed Glidden. And at that point, he said, they recently discovered a cache of records, photographs, journals, pictures that had been missing for decades in the attic of the Catalina Museum. Oh, you got to be kidding me. So it took me about 8 months to gain access there. And including a $1,000 donation to the new museum, which I was more than happy to give, supporting a great cause. And the museum now is fantastic. And if you're out on Catalina, check it out. But I was able to access Glidden's files. I walked in. I met the curator, John Boragina. There were 2 tables with white paper on them. I had white gloves on. My camera was set up on a tripod, and let the games begin. And they began to bring out the museum boxes. So his cache of records had been poured over, looked at. We actually have a very interesting interview with John Boragina, the former curator of Catalina, who stated, get this, that some of the photographs that were originally in this cache of records recently discovered went missing. How convenient is that? And who knows what happened to them. But within the first 2 hours, I hit pay dirt. And what I mean by that, there was a series of photographs I found, which to me, to my eye, looked anomalous. Remember, I'm walking in there with a certain filter. I'm walking in there looking for giants, looking for skeletons with 6 fingers, looking for skeletal anomalies, which we found them, all of them. We found one skeleton with 6 fingers, plain as day. We found another one. And that was, by the way, we had a triple blind study with, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it was the skeletons showed that they were about 9 feet tall. So here's the deal. When I'm looking at Glidden, this photograph where he's standing in the pit and in front of him is a skeleton laying in situ. In other words, it's been uncovered in exactly the same way that it was put into this grave. And it's not a disarticulated bone pile. It is an articulated skeleton which has weathered literally the centuries. Glidden is standing there. He's leaning on a shovel. This is the early days. This is 1919. Glidden is employed by the High Museum. The High Museum later was gobbled up by the Smithsonian. So this is all above board. Now, there are some critics who say, well, Glidden staged the photograph. What do they base this on? They base it on the fact that they don't like the results of our triple blind study that we did with the photograph. And it was you that suggested that there were people that could look at this photograph that would have computerized software that could digitize the photograph and then be able to extrapolate heights, which is exactly, I took your suggestion and ran with it, posted a want ad on my blog, and lo and behold, within less than 24 hours, 4 people show up. Out of the 4, 3 of them follow through. And each one of them had a different software program in which they were able to take that photograph and digitize it in different ways. Ralph Glidden is 5 foot 8 inches tall. We know that. The skeleton in front of him seemed to me to be very large. And sure enough, when we begin to straighten up Glidden, and one of the researchers did this, move him out of the picture, create the height, and then do the same thing with the skeleton and stand the skeleton straight up, we have a disparity because that skeleton is about 8.5 feet. Actually, he put it at 9 feet, and then later on we sort of were conservative with our measurements and just let it go at 8.5 feet. But that is an anomaly. And that is it conclusive proof? No, it isn't. But doggone it, it's the first real photographic evidence that we have had to date which shows an 8.5 footer. And the fact that people, just because it solidifies or bolsters our paradigm, would have the gall to say that these photographs are staged without a shred of evidence, without any proof of that, is, in my opinion, beyond the pale. There's also another shot, again, with a skeleton with 6 fingers. Now, why, if Glidden is trying to create a ruse, why doesn't he elaborate that in his journals? He doesn't. In the same journal that we believe the skeleton is referenced to, it's just a passing comment. Found a very large skeleton, well over 8 feet. It's one line. That's all he gives it. If he's trying to create something and you know, some sort, he would embellish it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not there. Later on, it's Ralph Glidden, and I get that. You know, he's got the secrets of Catalina and all this stuff, but that's decades later. This is 1919. He's a young man, and he just starts digging, and he's uncovering this stuff. The question is, Gary, where are the bones? Where are these bones that were found in Ralph Glidden? And by the way, let me just show you one other thing, because I got to show you this one shot here. This was taken. This is from Catalina Island, right here. This shot. Notice the elongated skull. Notice the elongated skull. Look at when we blow up the baby, which is, oh rats, a little further on.
A little further on there.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
By the
Gary.
way, as he's thumbing through to find
There it
that
is.
picture, I got to tell you, the pictures are a huge part of the book. The photography is phenomenal. The production qualities is called On the Trail of the Nephilim 2. You found it.
Yeah, I found
There
it.
is.
Look at the elongated skull of a larger, we believe, a female, and then look at the elongated skull of the child at her feet. Now look at this. On this side is from a place called Watara, Peru. Notice the elongated skull, and this is from Catalina, thousands of miles apart. What happened to these artifacts? Why can't we see them? Why did they all just disappear? John Boragina told me that he believed that one of the ships that was loaded with all these skeletal remains was lost at sea. How convenient is that?
How convenient can
How
you
convenient.
get? Well, that doesn't account for the hundreds that have been seen inland, and everybody looked at them for years, and then suddenly they weren't around anymore. And we could go on and on with this, but in the interest of time, I want to move to a slightly different place, back more toward the region of these skulls that are in front of us here. In Peru, you went to a place called Camacho.
Correct.
Where is that from? The area that
It's very close to Paracas, probably 45-minute drive from Paracas, which is right on the west coast of Peru, right on the Pacific Ocean. And what we saw there was very troubling and very disturbing.
and tell us about Camacho. And you have a photo here in your book called "My First Look at Camacho," and to describe this, it's a field of bones as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
It's strange.
We arrived at Camacho down this very bumpy dirt road, mostly sand. We parked the van, we got out, and we began to hike up. And I want to show you this because this is Senior Juan leading the charge, as it were, up the hill. And you can see this is like salt flats, and the salt is just encrusted. It's like walking on the moon. I mean, it was like really strange, very barren landscape. And as we got to the top of the hill, in the distance, I could see that someone, the tomb robbers, the Huacaros, had gone in and uncovered this mass grave, and it's a kill zone. What happened there was something very ignoble. There's no funerary objects at all, and many of the skulls have either a fractured skull or a hole in the skull where a blunt object has hit it. Almost all of the skulls, as you can see here, are elongated. And we believe, and we had a forensic anthropologist lined up to go and check it out, and at the last minute he pulled out. More than likely, in my opinion, peer pressure, afraid to go and look at this stuff. Here's the theory that I'm working with. If these are Nephilim tribes, and they have certain powers, they would be feared. They would be feared by normal humans.
Yeah.
And so what we believe, the theory that I'm working on, and there's no way to prove this yet, but this is a kill zone. We believe this is the last vestiges of the so-called Paracas people. And by the way, we talked about this in that Trail 1. The Paracas people show up in Paracas about 3,500 years ago, which fits the timeline perfectly with the conquest of Canaan, thus bolstering our hypothesis that, in fact, these may be one of the Nephilim tribes which fled the Levant. The preliminary DNA testing seems to point in that direction. The 1842 hand sketch seems to also bolster our hypothesis. The fact that many of these skulls lack a sagittal suture, again, is another indication that we are looking at an outside agency manipulating the genome. And of course, we believe that that outside agency is the fallen one, is Satan. That's what we believe. So Camacho was extremely disturbing because we counted at least 50 skulls, at least.
And you're
minimum.
saying that there was a systematic effort here to wipe out a bloodline.
Yes.
Wow.
That's why we wanted to get the forensic anthropologist down there.
Now, as you're talking, I'm thinking about our own Bible, and I'm thinking about David and Goliath. Goliath was a great big guy, probably 9-10 feet tall at least, 6 fingers. He was a champion. He was a very powerful guy. The Bible gives the weight of his weapons. It talks about his sword, and we've all read that for years, and it has had no context. You're sort of putting Goliath in a context for us. He's not just one isolated tribesman. He's part of a huge infestation. And in fact, the Lord was very specific. He told the Israelites to go in there and wipe them out.
And this goes back to Genesis 3. This is why it's so important to understand Genesis 3, because when the Most High God says, I'll put enmity between your seed and the woman's seed, what is he talking about here? And then later on in Genesis 6, it's exactly what we see.
Yes.
There's a seed war going on. You talked about this in Nephilim Mounds too.
Right.
The seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And eventually the seed of the woman produces the Messiah, which is our salvation.
Right.
I get that. Why I'm on the trail? Because it all points back to the biblical narrative, and it begins to validate the biblical narrative through archaeological evidence in ways that we've never, ever seen before. And I find that both astounding and just incredibly fun to do, quite frankly.
Speaking of 6 fingers, right here on page 259, you've got an etching or some kind of a painting on a wall.
It's a tapestry.
A tapestry? Aha. And it's a primitive tapestry. And it's a hand being held up like this, except it has 6 fingers. Certainly an accident, right? Couldn't be on purpose.
Yeah, and when we show this is in the Amana Museum in Lima. When I actually Corey Huffman and pointed this out to me, and we were not allowed to take photographs of anything in the museum. And I looked at our docent and I said, look, I've written books about this. I need to take a photograph of this. And he allowed me to take a photograph.
Wow.
And here in the middle of the picture, we see a 6-fingered hand. Curiously enough and interestingly enough, in Catalina, we see something which is absolutely profound. And it's right here. And we have a 6-fingered skeleton found in Catalina. And the reason why I'm so interested again in this is it bolsters exactly what we read about in our Bibles. It's the same deal. And so is it conclusive? Not yet. But we feel as we uncover more evidence, literally, it seems to be supporting our hypothesis. And eventually, when we get the DNA testing of this, it's going to create an uproar. Because now what are we looking at?
Let me stop for a moment here, give L.A. a chance to catch his breath, and I want to talk about On the Trail of the Nephilim. It's in 2 volumes, Volume 1, Volume 2, and I mean, they will stretch your imagination, folks. He'll take you to places you never thought about, and he will bring you to some conclusions that you've never thought about, I'm sure. You can buy either one of these books separately. If you buy both of them together, you get this DVD. It's called Watchers 6. And tell us about Watchers 6, L.A.
Watchers 6 is sort of the companion DVD with On the Trail of the Nephilim 1. What we saw in Watchers 6, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, the ancient megalithic structures in Peru, the elongated skulls, Waki, which I showed you a picture with a very elongated skull, which has I think two more ribs than what a normal human being should have.
Yeah.
And it just goes on and on. What we found there was just astounding, and that's what Watcher 6 is about.
The Bible is very clear. The human race was corrupted before the flood. The Lord destroyed it. Noah was perfect in his generations. I think all of his family, the 8 who escaped on the ark,
I agree.
were perfect in their generations. And they came over, they reestablished the culture on this side of the flood. But, and this is a discussion for much later, somehow these giants showed up again. And my conclusion would be that the fallen angels once again descended to earth, perhaps with man's permission. And I can see why. He might have regarded them as saviors of a sort before the flood, and there were many stories in that day about the pre-flood conditions. And I can see people trying to restart a culture after the flood and saying, well, our ancestors had all these wonderful people from on high who came down and taught us the arts of smelting and casting and woodworking and so forth. So we would like to have these people come back to us. And they probably wanted them to come back, sometime probably around the Tower of Babel incident.
I agree.
And there they go. There you are. Now, that brings us to practically the end of our program.
That was
How would
fast.
you like to conclude? And I say that knowing that you have 100 more things to say. Sure.
Well, basically, the reason why I am on the trail, and I've already said this, but I want to state it again, is that all of this evidence points back to the biblical narrative. And if we can prove that the giants roamed the earth, that the Nephilim were real, then all of a sudden the words of Yeshua, the words of Jesus, take on a new meaning, take on a weight that we've never seen before. That the days of Noah, it'll be like the days of Noah when he returns. And remember, when he states this 2,000 years ago, there is no church, there's no clergy, there's no Christendom. There's just Yeshua making this absurd statement. When I return, it'll be like the days of Noah. Yeah. He's giving us a dire warning, and he's setting the stage of what the world will look like upon his return. And in my opinion, we are on the cusp of it. And that's why this research points back to the King of Kings, who is going to come again soon. And of course, we're speaking of Jesus, our Savior and our Lord.
We're living in the end times.
Amen.
This is but one of many proofs of that. The fact that the culture would resemble the days of Noah. I think we're headed there really fast. We could talk for another hour about this.
Easily.
L.A., thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you coming by. And to the rest of you, avail yourselves of L.A.'s books, On the Trail of the Nephilim, Part 1, Part 2. When you buy them both, you get the DVD at no extra cost. Have a great day in the Lord, and keep watching, everybody.